All right, we are back with a new video, and we are back talking about Big Brother 24, updating the power rankings towards the end of week one. And this has not been the best start to the season, all things considered, for reasons we'll be getting into once we get into the list, but not ideal from a gameplay standpoint, but it is what it is. And admittedly, this is probably going to be a bit longer than usual. I feel like that's largely the case with these early power rankings, especially for Big Brother, as a lot of it is just me establishing what's being set up in the house and what's really going to dictate the game moving forward. And really, there's a lot that's still up in the air. I mean, it's really hard to assess what things are going to really matter in the game and what things are going to fall away. But the fact that they are set up means I kind of have to bring them up to some degree. So that'll be something to take into account with this ranking, but I do plan for these to get shorter as the season goes along, as things become a bit more reinforced and a bit more solidified. That and also just there being fewer players in the house. So there's that to consider. But as usual, there are 16 players to talk about. And let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 16, the player I believe is the least likely to win the season from this point forward is the person who is most likely going to be the boot on Thursday night. And here we have Taylor. And it's really unfortunate what's happened to Taylor here, where she really came into the game with a lot of preconceived notions about her, largely with her being a pageant queen, which really caused a lot of the house to not view her in the best light. I mean, we really saw Paloma early on really galvanize a lot of the women against her, as she was seen as a quote unquote guy's girl. And it's really crazy seeing how she was able to talk to Monty about it and in turn really turn most of the house against her, to where she ended up being the replacement nominee and the replacement target once Michael won the veto. And she was largely let out of the loop for a lot of the week as well, where people really iced her out of a lot of conversations. She really didn't have much of a clue what was going on, didn't realize just how much danger she was in until it was too late. And even now that she's on the block, and people are starting to realize that maybe she didn't blow up quite the way that they thought that she did, which, by the way, is not great considering she is a black woman. I mean, people are starting to pick up on her, but at this point, they kind of just given up and feel like that they're in too deep, and they aren't really considering switching the vote at the end of the day. Now, I should say up front that I am recording this on Tuesday, July 12th, so there is still some time for some things to change. However, for the time being, it doesn't seem super likely. And even the one thing that could save her, that being the backstage twist, I mean, yeah, it is possible that she could end up off the block through that. But if the twist is what I think it's going to be, and that being just one of the backstagers ends up as a third nominee, I doubt it's going to lead too much. And I feel like people are just, like resigned to the fact that Taylor's going to go home and there isn't really much she can do there. So at the end of the day, I feel like Taylor is someone who didn't really get a chance to play the game per se, as people really just assumed the worst from her. And yes, she did do some things that fueled that, such as her talking about potentially targeting Paloma, or at least it seemed that way on the outset. Her doing things like talking about her pageant background, the fact that she wore her finale dress, and yes, people did encourage her in that regard, but people really started to use that against her, and just people just assuming the worst out of her and her not really getting the chance to really bond with anyone or really play the game in the best way really caused her to be in this bad position. And it's unfortunate at the end of the day, and part of the reason why people are upset at the season so far, to the point to where even like production had to talk with a lot of the house guests about microaggressions. It's really not a pleasant situation, but it does lead to Taylor being at the bottom here, as she doesn't really seem to be primed to stay here. And it's unfortunate at the end of the day, as I felt like she had some potential coming in, but through circumstances outside of her control, she is probably going to be the first boot here. And because of that, she is the least likely person to win, and the reason she is here at number 16. Now we're moving on to number 15, and we actually have the other person currently on the block, and here we have Terrence. And Terrence is largely doing how I expected him to do, to where he's not doing anything super wrong. I mean, he's not annoying many of his house guests, but he's also playing incredibly passively. Now, some of that is because he is the oldest player on the cast, and through that, he isn't really connecting super well with a lot of the players. Some of it is because he's going to bed early, and through that, he's missing out on a lot of game talks. And at the end of the day, he is largely seen as an easy person to put up on the block. That is largely why Daniel puts him up, despite the fact that he wants Terrence to stay. He sees Terrence as someone who's going to cause the least amount of waste by being up there. And through that, that's not particularly great. And he is one of the few players right now to not really be in any sort of alliance to where, yeah, people like him and people seem to tolerate him all right, but he's not really seen as a priority. There isn't really anyone that's super incentivized to keep him around at this point, and I feel like he hasn't really been being doing much to avoid that. Now, granted, him being on the block could have done so, but at the end of the day, I feel like he is someone who is largely going to be seen as an easy pawn to be taken out moving forward. There was a chance he could have been voted out outright had Michael stayed up on the block, given how Michael has the support of people from Mamba. But even now that there is a target to be taken out over him, I don't really get the sense that Terrence is going to be doing super well moving forward. And I don't get the sense that he's going to be turning it up too much moving forward either. So, admittedly, while he isn't in too much danger of being targeted immediately, I feel like he isn't going to be primed super well to win the game. And that's a big reason that he is this low on the list, and a big reason he is here at number 15. Now we're moving on to number 14, and we have someone who could be in quite a bit of danger coming into next week, largely due to actions they have done in recent days. But even before that, I wasn't feeling too great about them. But here we have Brittany. Now, Brittany is kind of doing how I expected her to where, yeah, she is a super fan, but didn't really give me great vibes about her ability to play the game that well. Now, admittedly, despite that, I did have our couple spots higher before yesterday. I kind of made a draft of this list yesterday, but then after seeing what happened over the past day, I kind of dropped her all the way down here. Now, admittedly, before that, she wasn't doing the best. I mean, yeah, she was included in the Girls Alliance, but even then, she was kind of a last minute addition to where I'm not sure she would have even been included in there had she not been in the room when that alliance was coming together. So that's not particularly great. You know, she has bonded with Michael, but then again, Michael was a target coming into the week. And while Michael is someone who was able to save himself, I don't get the sense that Michael's super loyal to her at this point, especially now that he's doing a bit more in the game. So that's not great. But really, the main reason she's this low is because of what she did over the last day, where she decided to throw Amira under the bus for whatever reason by approaching Pooch, trying to get him to work together. And despite Pooch seeing Amira as someone who could target him moving forward, and despite Brittany saying that Amira did plan to target him, confirming his suspicion, Pooch decided to use this opportunity to tell Amira about this, who then leaked it to the Girls Alliance, who now really don't trust her. And Pooch decides to use Brittany's exchange with him as an excuse to target her coming into the next week, despite him planning to target Amira down the line. So really, she really blows up her game here by like making her alliance that she already wasn't super well positioned in, really suspicious of her, all the while making herself a priority to be targeted by someone like Pooch, someone from the opposite alliance, and someone who, I guess as a spoiler alert, is someone who I kind of fear could win HOH coming into next week. So there's that to consider. So at the end of the day, Brittany has really not demonstrated herself to be playing super well, as she doesn't seem super well positioned. She is someone who could be a target coming to next week. And aside from that, she's a really bad liar as well, and someone who really demonstrated a lack of social awareness, doesn't really read the room super well, despite her being a hypnotherapist. So it's not looking great for Brittany right now. And yeah, while she could scrape her way out of this, I'm not getting the best vibes for her moving forward. So because of that, she's here at number 14. Now we're moving on to number 13. And similar to Brittany, I don't feel too great about this person either. And admittedly, while they haven't blown up their game to the degree that Brittany has, I'm still not feeling great about her. But here we have Indy. And Indy is not in the best spot. I mean, she was technically included in the Girls Alliance as well. But even then, I don't feel like she's a super integral piece there. She was seen as a potential target coming into this week, where Daniel considered her a firecracker. She was seen on the outs. And even after the veto, I mean, she was thrown around as a potential replacement nom until Taylor really emerged as that option. And even moving forward, I mean, despite her not being that active within the game, there are people who could target her moving forward. I mean, as I said, Daniel considered targeting her at a point. Pooch is someone who is planning to target her soon as well. And in general, she kind of falls into this perception of being closer to the guys and to the women, which in turn kind of harms her relationship within the Girls Alliance. So while she hasn't done anything too active in the game, she is still someone who is seen as an easy target moving forward, which doesn't bode well for her, and a big reason she is here at number 13. Now moving on to number 12, and we have someone who's kind of similar to Indy in that they haven't been super active. However, they have not been talked nearly as much as a potential target, but here we have Jasmine. And at the end of the day, I don't feel like Jasmine's playing super poorly per se. I mean, she is in the Girls Alliance. I feel like she's in a better position than someone like an Indy at the moment. And I feel like she definitely has potential to do better within the game. However, at the end of the day, I feel like she is someone who hasn't really been super active. I mean, yeah, she is in the Girls Alliance, but hasn't really been effective at like getting her way in a lot of situations. And through that, I feel like Jasmine is someone who is largely loyal to her alliance for the time being and sort of just a number for her group. Now, she isn't being targeted per se. I feel like she is someone who will definitely be around for a while and definitely someone who isn't going to be a priority to be taken out. However, I'm not really getting too much from her gameplay wise to where I'm not feeling super confident in her actual chances of winning the game for the time being. But then again, it is week 1. There's time for her to do better. But for now, I feel like 12 is about as high as I can put her. Now moving on to number 11, and we have a player who's pretty similar to the last two players I talked about, not super well positioned, and someone who hasn't been playing super actively. However, I feel like this player is more likely to either get into power or have one of their allies get into power. But here we have Joseph. And Joseph, similar to these last two players, has been pretty passive for the most part. He was largely in the background for the first couple days, wasn't really like connecting with anyone super well, and was even talked about as a potential target at some point. I mean, he was sort of lumped in with Monty as being this big physical guy. He seemed to be the easier target between the two. And even after the veto, there was some consideration for him to be put up as a replacement, but then again, not for super long. And even now, I mean, he is technically in the guys' alliance known as Oasis. However, he isn't really that included into it to where he's largely just someone that the rest of the Oasis seeks to protect and someone to look out for rather than really being an active member within there. So because of that, I'm not getting too great of a sense of his position within there. However, the reason I have him above Indy and Jasmine is that he is someone who I think could win some more competitions than either of them. And even outside of that, he is aligned with competition threats or potential competition threats. People like a Pooch, people like a Monty, people like a Turner, and people like a Kyle. I feel like if those people were to get in the power, which I think is a bit more likely than the allies of Indy and Jasmine, then Joe should be safe for the time being. But then again, I mean, we haven't seen him compete too much, so we'll have to see what happens there. But for the time being, I can't really have him too high based on how passive he's been in and just how not of a great of a position he is outside of that. So because of that, I do have him here at number 11. Now moving on to number 10, and I was pretty disappointed by this person's gameplay this week, especially given their position. But here we have Daniel, the current HOH. And I feel like Daniel has played this HOH not the best in my opinion. I feel like in a lot of ways he was trying to be the anti-Frenchie, like someone who was trying to avoid making all these big moves, targeting a million people, flipping back and forth and making deals with everyone in the house to where he blows up his game. I feel like Daniel was trying to avoid that to a degree. However, I feel like he went a bit too far in the opposite direction by not really talking too much game with anyone over the first couple days, to where he didn't really build a power structure for himself. And considering he is the first HOH of the season, the fact that he really wastes a lot of that opportunity to build a power structure that can suit him was pretty bad in my opinion. Now, yes, he is eventually included into the Motley crew and then later the Oasis. However, one, I feel like he waited a bit too long for that, to where I feel like Pooch and others were more active in doing so. And in turn, Daniel doesn't seem super well positioned within that. And then two, and more critically, this only happens after Paloma went ahead and created another power structure that includes over half the house that largely excludes him. And aside from that, he doesn't really connect super well with a lot of people outside of his group. Now he does build a decent relationship with Nicole, built a final two with her. That should be a pretty helpful relationship for him moving forward. However, he hasn't really done too much outside of that to, like ensure that he is set up super well moving forward. To where again, I mean, yes, he does get included into Oasis. However, how much of that is just him being HOH? I mean, would he have even been included in that had he not been the first HOH? I think there's quite a bit of question marks in that regard. And aside from that, he didn't really show too much initiative in terms of his target either, to where he took a lot of time to really establish who he wanted as his target and only settled on Michael due to really questionable reasons, where he talks about how Michael talked the least amount of game with him, despite the fact that he didn't really talk too much game with really anyone before the nomination. So that's not particularly great. He puts up Terrence as a pawn, someone who, yes, was seen as an easy target, but also someone that he explicitly wanted to stay in the game. And he didn't seem to realize that by putting him up against Michael, Michael was someone who had a lot of support behind him with the Mamba Alliance, support that he didn't even realize that Michael had. And had the nomination stayed the same, there is a chance that he could have lost out on that vote, Michael staying in the game and losing Terrence in the process, someone who, again, he explicitly wanted to stay in the game. So I feel like through that, he hasn't really handled this HOH super well. And moving forward, I mean, yeah, he isn't a priority to be targeted per se. However, we see people like Amira and a lot of the girls members not really look at him too favorably and are considering him as a potential target in the future. So through that, I'm not feeling too great about Daniel coming out this first HOH, and considering the fact that he had the opportunity to really take control of the game, only to not really do so, is a pretty big indictment on him as a whole. Now, granted, he isn't going to be targeted over someone like a Brittany for the time being, and he does still have Oasis and Nicole at the end of the day, people who do want to keep him around for now. However, I'm not getting the best sense that he's going to position himself super well moving forward to where he probably will avoid being targeted. I feel like he's someone who will have a hard time getting towards the end of the game, and in turn, someone who could possibly lose the game along the way. So because of that, I don't really look at his HOH here too favorably, and in turn, his overall chances. But he is a bit more active than the players we just talked about. So because of that, I do have him here at number 10. Now moving on to number 9, and we have a player who I did talk about not too long ago, but here we have Pooch. And Pooch for me is someone who could really go either way depending on how these next couple HOH results go. To where on one hand, he is someone who has been playing a bit more actively than a lot of other players in the house, and I do think there is some merit to his game. I mean, he was able to build the motley crew with Daniel and Turner. He then was able to expand that into the Oasis, which he largely saw as sort of this brigade style alliance. And in turn, I feel like he is someone who definitely has what it takes to do well within the game. And he definitely is aligned with people who I think at the time being could win a lot of competitions, could get into power. And I feel like that's something that greatly benefits Pooch. However, I also think he has not done the best job of managing his threat level, to where, yes, he was being included early on into certain alliances, but definitely by a couple days in, he was definitely starting to be noticed by some of the women as a big player and someone who probably should not be included in certain alliances. He was literally going to be the sixth member of Mamba up until Paloma got sketched out by him, and in turn, he ended up being excluded by that alliance in favor of Michael. And in turn, I feel like the women are definitely starting to target him. I feel like depending on how the HOH comes out, he could definitely be a target as soon as next week even. So I feel like that's not particularly great. However, there are still some merits to his game. Like, for one, he does at least have an alliance, an Oasis. He has a very close relationship with Turner and some other players. I feel like he is someone who could win in competitions. I mean, we haven't really seen that substantiated yet, as we haven't seen him compete per se, but he is someone who I think could end up either way, depending on how this HOH goes. I feel like that's largely going to dictate his fate in the game moving forward. And I feel like the other factor to it is the fact that he was able to get Brittany to open up to him, despite the fact that he doesn't really have that great of a relationship with Brittany. The fact that Brittany saw him as a potential ally and chose to reveal to him that Amira is targeting him is something to his credit, at least. So I feel like there is still some merit to Pooch's game, And the fact that his game could go either way is a big reason that I don't have him lower on the list. However, it's still that uncertainty, plus the fact that he could be a big target moving forward, is the reason that I do have to leave him here at number 9. Now moving on to number 8, and we have a pretty similar player to Pooch in my opinion, and here we have Turner. Now admittedly, I think Turner has not done as much active work as someone like a Pooch. I feel like he struggled a bit socially early on. He was pretty quiet during a lot of that early day. And yes, while he was included into the Motley Crew, I feel like a lot of that was because he just happened to walk into the room as Pooch and Daniel were talking. So I feel like that is something that works out in his favor. To his credit, he does step it up a bit as the week goes along. Like he does build that 4-person alliance with Alyssa, Paloma, and Pooch, like where they agree to relay information to each other. So I feel like that is something. However, on the other hand, that is also something that gets him put on the target list by the Girls Alliance, to where him and Pooch are being seen as this grouping that the women should target depending on how the HOH goes. And that is ultimately the reason that I have him this low as well, in that the Girls Alliance is planning to target either him or Pooch depending on how the HOH goes for this upcoming week. And that's not great in my particular opinion. However, the reason I have him above Pooch, despite the fact that he hasn't been playing as actively, is that I feel like Turner has done a bit better in terms of managing his threat level. To me, I feel like Pooch is always going to be the bigger target over them as long as Pooch is in the game. So I feel like that is something Turner could at least turn to benefit from. And plus, I feel like Turner has demonstrated more ability to win competitions. We literally saw him make it to the final stage of the first HOH comp, whereas we haven't even seen Pooch compete in a comp yet. So I feel like that is something I also have to give Turner some credit for. I feel like I have a bit more faith in Turner to win competitions early on if he were to be targeted. So at the end of the day, I feel like Pooch and Turner are kind of in a similar boat to where a lot of their fate in the game will be determined by how this next HOH turns out. Now, to be fair, if Oasis does end up winning HOH next week and in turn start to win HOH more often, I feel like that could definitely benefit Turner's position moving forward as well. And I do have to commend him again for at least being willing to reach out to people outside his alliance. But it's still that uncertainty over his future in the game that does lead me to put him here at number 8. Now I'm moving on to number 7, and it's sort of crazy that this person is this high, especially considering they were the target coming into this week. But here we have Michael. And as I said, Michael had a pretty rough start at the beginning of the game, where he definitely struggled a bit socially early on. I mean, he did all right in one-on-one conversations, but he really struggled in a lot of those group talks that really made it hard for him to be included in a lot of those game talks early on, to where Daniel eventually decides to target him. Now, granted, a lot of that is due to questionable stuff, like the fact that he accuses Michael of not really talking game to him, despite the fact that Daniel himself wasn't talking too much game. It really felt like Daniel was grasping for straws and really looking for a reason to target Michael there. He is also included into Mamba. However, I feel like a lot of that wasn't really due to anything he was doing. It was more so Pooch really sketching out a lot of the people there to where Pooch was excluded from it. And in turn, Michael just happened to be the replacement there. Now, to his credit, he does do some work afterwards to really ingratiate himself within that group. He recognizes he's at the bottom and really tries to improve his position there. He obviously wins the veto and in turn takes himself down. And afterwards, we see him build this close alliance with Kyle. I mean, now granted, this did form relatively recently, and it's unclear whether this will actually amount to anything. But the fact that he is trying to build an alliance with people and really trying to improve his position is pretty good at the end of the day. He really wants to work on dismantling Paloma's alliances, which is pretty good. Also, the Women's Alliance want to work with him. That's another good sign. And he also has his relationship with Brittany, although even then, I mean, Brittany is quickly becoming a sinking ship, but he does at least have that for the time being. So at the end of the day, I feel like Michael's someone who, while definitely struggling early on, has kind of found his footing. Now, a lot of that was because he won the veto, but even if he had stayed up on the block, I mean, he was already in Mamba at that point, and I feel like that was a grouping that was likely to save him at the end of the week. Now, who knows what could have happened there, but still, he at least had that backing there. And I feel like moving forward, he is someone who is definitely starting to find his footing, as I said. He is starting to branch out and build other relationships that could help him moving forward. And ultimately, despite him being the first target by Daniel, no one really is looking out to get him at this point. I mean, I wouldn't say that he's the best position right now, but it feels like a lot of people's attention has shifted to other targets at this point, even beyond this week. So I feel like that is a boon you can give to Michael's game. However, there are still enough question marks with like how he did early on the week, and plus what his efforts will ultimately amount to. That does lead me to put him here at number 7. Now we're moving on to number 6, and I had no idea what to do with this person. As on one hand, this person has been playing very actively, and they were pretty effective in terms of building an alliance early on. However, I do question how sustainable that is moving forward, but here we have Paloma. And Paloma has largely been the story of this first week, with her really being very active in the game. Now, she obviously was selected by Pooch to be a backstager, like couldn't compete in any competitions and also couldn't be nominated. I mean, despite her still being vulnerable. However, she really like puts her foot on the gas early on, building that final 2 with Alyssa. And in turn, they end up building a power structure that includes over half the house. They're able to build the Girls Alliance early on, which decides to target another woman for whatever reason. And she also works with Alyssa to build Mamba, sort of this 6-person alliance that has 3 strong guys in it, but also 3 women as well. So I feel like she was pretty effective in doing so. And at the moment, that seems to be where a lot of the power in the game lies, with that power structure that she was active in building. And you do have to give Paloma quite a bit of credit for that. She also is technically one of the people that turns the house against Taylor, and while that is for pretty questionable reasons, I mean, she does at least have that influence early on. And again, if that was it and that was all that there was, then I feel like she would probably be either number 1 or 2. She was the most effective person in building the power structure that could potentially run the game moving forward. However, the main reason I have her this low is even when she was creating a lot of this alliances, all this power and stuff, I did question like how sustainable it'd be and whether she would be able to hold on to the power that she currently has, as she definitely demonstrates a lot of cockiness early on. Like, she talks about how she has the game already won. I mean, she was literally talking to Monty about how she would plan to split the prize money by investing in businesses, which again is a bit of a red flag as well. But also, like, we've seen some of her behavior in recent days really call into question like how well she's actually doing, like on a mental health level. I mean, she has said some pretty out there things at this point, like, so there's definitely that concern as well. And I feel like people are starting to pick up on her game and how well she's positioned and how she is kind of running the game right now. I mean, we've heard Kyle and Michael talk about it, how they really want to dismantle a lot of Paloma's side alliances in order to take the game for themselves. I feel like that is something that could potentially undermine her. I feel like people like Pooch is another person that could potentially go after her, not immediately, but certainly in the future. And I feel like Paloma could run the risk of overplaying and could run the risk of putting herself too out in front to where people would be willing to flip on her moving forward. So I feel like it's a really mixed bag with Paloma right now, to where on paper she is in the best position right now. She is the person who is technically running the game. However, there are enough red flags there between stuff that she's saying, stuff that she's doing, and the way people are reacting to her that makes me wonder how long this could really last for her. So because of that, I can't have her at the very top of the list, despite her being very active early on. But it's the fact that she was able to build that power structure early on, really have some success early on, is a big reason she's at least this high. And because of that, she is here at number 6. Now we're moving on to number 5, and we have kind of the opposite of Paloma, to where this person technically isn't in too many alliances. However, I feel like they demonstrated enough good gameplay to where I do have some confidence in them moving forward. But here we have Nicole. And admittedly, Nicole hasn't been included in too many alliances. I mean, yeah, she does build the final 2 with Daniel, the first HOH. She technically is also part of a deal with Jasmine, Kyle, Monty, and Paloma, the porta potty people from the first HOH. But even then, that doesn't seem to be too much of a factor at this point. And at the end of the day, I don't feel like she's too influential within the game per se. However, the reason I have her this high is that no one's really going after her at this point. And I feel like even when she isn't really included in a lot of things, I feel like she definitely demonstrates herself as a competent player, someone that's kind of a cool head for Daniel to a degree, and someone who has potential to get into a better position moving forward. Now, whether that will amount to anything remains to be seen. I mean, there is technically that alliance with her, Daniel, Alyssa, Paloma, Pooch, and Turner. And, like that is something that could lead to something. However, for right now, I can't say that she's in the best position. However, it's largely her potential to do well that does lead me to put her here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and I've kind of been underwhelmed by this person to a degree, to where on one hand, they are in a very strong position, and I feel like they have a lot of potential to do well in the game, and no one's really going after them right now, which is also good. However, I do question how actively they're really playing the game right now. But here we have Kyle, and Kyle's in a good spot right now. I mean, he's in not only Mamba, but also Oasis. No one's really going after him. He seems well liked enough by a decent chunk of the house, and he definitely has potential to do well in the game. I mean, he is a super fan. He's also pretty good physically. I mean, he could definitely win a whole bunch of competitions, really gain a lot of power within the game. And the fact that no one's really targeting him right now really increases his win equity in my eyes. However, the main reason I can't put him too high is that up until yesterday, I feel like he was largely playing pretty passively for the most part. I mean, he was pretty much in the background for a lot of stuff that was happening. And while he was included in both Mamba and Oasis, he didn't really do too much actively to be included in those. I mean, it's largely because he is well liked and seen as a big physical guy that led him to be included in those groups. But still, the fact that he was included in both alliances and no one seems to be going after him really bodes well for him moving forward. And also, he has been kind of turning it up in recent days. I mean, we saw him bond with Michael, and he agrees to work with him to get closer to Alyssa and dismantle Paloma's side alliances, like Paloma being the person who is technically in the best position right now. So there's a lot of potential for Kyle to do well moving forward. And I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up going up on my power rankings moving forward. However, it's the fact that he's largely been playing passively up until today that leads me to put him a bit lower than he probably should be. But I do have him here at number 4. Now we're moving on to number 3. And before yesterday, I would have had this person at number 1 actually, as I've been largely impressed by the way this person has been playing and plus the position they were in. However, some stuff in recent days has caused me to question their longevity, but they are still in a good spot for now. But here we have Amira. And Amira has been playing pretty well for the most part early on. Again, she is included in both Mamba and the Girls Alliance. And yes, while she isn't in the duo of Alyssa and Paloma, she does seem to be operating pretty well. I mean, she's well liked by a lot of the house, and she does seem to have some influence within that group moving forward. And I do have some confidence in her to be this under the radar player that's able to gain control in the game. She's also good enough in competitions. I feel like she's definitely one of the more capable women based on what we've seen so far. And through that, I do have some confidence in Amira to do well. However, the main reason I did drop her from number 1 this past day or so is because we have since learned that Pooch does plan to target her. I mean, Pooch has said that he recognizes that she's the smartest one out there. She's the one who's the most likely to expose like the Oasis and most likely to try to go after like Pooch, Turner, a lot of the men within that. So because of that, Pooch has sort of gained an eye onto her. So, and that does worry me depending on how well the HOH goes moving forward. Now, granted, Brittany did blow up her game as well. I mean, Brittany tried to throw her under the bus, and then instead of Pooch deciding to use that to accelerate Amira's target, he decided to use that to push off Amira's target and instead target Brittany for the time being. So there's that at least. I mean, the fact that Pooch didn't immediately target Amira is somewhat impressive, although I do think it is still pretty good on his end that he's able to like do that as well. I mean, so there is some good aspects to Amira's game, but it's still that worry about her being on Pooch's radar and her not entirely being set up super well right now to address that is a big reason that I had to leave her here at number 3. Now we're moving on to number 2, and I feel like this is the clear top 2 for me right now. I feel like these players have been playing pretty well for the most part and do seem to be in pretty good positions. However, I feel like this number 2 person is a bit more likely to be targeted moving forward. But here we have Monty. And I feel like Monty's been playing pretty well so far. I mean, he's very well liked by a lot of the house. People tended to gravitate towards him early on. And again, similar to Kyle, he was able to be included in both Mamba and the Oasis. I mean, he is seen as this pretty strong physical guy, which admittedly is a bit of a red flag. I mean, people are already lumping him in with a lot of the physical guys like Joe and Kyle, and seeing Monty as this guy who could potentially win a lot of competitions. But the thing is, people are so gravitated towards him that they're unwilling to target him for the time being, and people are actively saying that they want to keep the big physical guys around for at least a month, which is kind of insane when you think about it. And I feel like Monty is someone who very much could benefit a lot from that. However, the fact that he is still being seen as a big target is part of the reason that he isn't higher on the list. I also feel like he's been mostly competent at the game. I mean, he isn't a mastermind or anything, but he is someone who, again, is being included in a lot of these alliances, someone who definitely has a lot of sway in the game, to where he was technically one of the people that was able to get Taylor to be as targeted as she was across the house. And admittedly, people like Nicole and Daniel have been picking up on that as well, like saying that they should keep an eye on Monty as well. So again, that's not particularly great. So at the end of the day, I feel like Monty is someone who is very well positioned right now. Again, someone who definitely could win a lot of competitions moving forward. I mean, he did make it to the last stage of the H2H comp, and he is someone who I think will definitely be around for a little bit. I mean, no one's really targeting him right now. However, it is still those concerns about him being targeted moving forward, like the fact that he's already being seen as this big physical threat, and also someone who was responsible for spreading lies against Taylor, that do give me enough reservation to leave him here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the player I believe is the most likely to win Big Brother 24 right now is Alyssa. And this may seem like a weird pick. And to be fair, I feel like this is still early enough in the season to where a lot of these rankings can radically change moving forward. However, the main reason I have Alyssa number 1 is I feel like she has a lot of the benefits that a lot of the top tier people have, while having very few of the downsides. I mean, she is someone who has been playing somewhat actively early on. I mean, she is definitely not as active as someone like a Paloma. And even now in recent days, she hasn't been super active either, but she is still in a great position being in that final 2 with Paloma, being someone who is seen as the smaller target between her and Paloma. And of course, someone who is in both the Girls Girls Alliance and Mamba, so that's particularly good. We also got in recent days Kyle and Michael saying that they want to work with her and they really want to dismantle Paloma's power structure in order to get closer to Alyssa as well. So that is something, at least for her. And no one's really targeting her right now. And I feel like that is something that will give Alyssa a longevity within the game. And I do have enough confidence in her as a player right now to where I feel like she could definitely start to step it up and really take advantage of this position to improve her own win equity. So I feel like those are definitely things that are in Alyssa's favor right now. Now, admittedly, I still have some question marks about whether this will actually translate to a win at the end of the day. I mean, yes, she isn't being targeted to the same degree as someone like a Monty or a Pooch right now. However, will it actually matter by the end of the game if she's able to like win competitions and navigate through the game in a way to where she can win the game at the end? So I do think there are some question marks there, and I can definitely see her dropping in the rankings moving forward. However, I feel like she has the least amount of red flags out of anyone we talked about so far, which, to be fair, I don't think anyone here is playing exceptionally well. I may have said that at the beginning of the video already. However, I feel like Alyssa has definitely demonstrated herself as a competent enough player, someone who is very well positioned, and someone who has potential as well. That does lead me to put her here at number 1. And there we go. That will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out with the channel. Now, I will be back again next week to talk about week 2, of course, and we'll see what happens there. So stay tuned for that. Survivor SA is also starting next week, and I'll begin my coverage for that. So stay tuned for that as well. And also, if you haven't already, be sure to join my Discord server. I created it not too long ago. And again, it's sort of a place to sort of hang out and talk about Survivors and Big Brother and all the shows that I cover across both my channels. So, be sure to join that. I'll leave a link for it in the description. But for now, that is the video. See ya.